Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Pollinate, the Wilson's Orchard and Farm podcast. We have a fun one today. We did one before where Paul Rasch interviewed me, and now I'm going to talk to him. I get almost no requests for this, but I'm doing it anyway. We're going to find out some more about the history of Wilson's and what it takes to run an orchard, and the history of the Rasch family, which I've had the luck to work for the past 4 years. Really great people. So we're here with Paul Rasch. Hi, Paul.
Hiya.
And we're also drinking some good French cider. Tell us about this cider, Paul.
Very nice. So, yeah, I mean, it's a new one on me. I'm not even going to try the name. Basandre.
Basandre.
All right. Very nice. As typical of French ciders, well carbonated. Usually bottle conditioned.
Yep.
And, you know, they can get really funky over here when they travel across the pond and stuff. But this one is super clean, really nice, clear tannin lines, good color on it, and really nice carbonation.
Oh, it's really delicious.
Yeah.
It has the feel to me of a sparkling. It's good champagne.
Yeah.
In that vein, talk a little bit about cider culture in the U.S. and kind of where that is now, because I know it's evolving pretty quickly in the past 5-10 years.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think when you talk about cider culture in the U.S., it's a continuum. Like here in the Midwest, it's very different cider culture than it is, let's say, on the East Coast. The East Coast is dominated right now by a lot of smaller cideries that are doing 750 ml, $15 to $20 bottles of cider. That's certainly not all of it. There's lots of big cideries. There's big craft.
Right.
And there's,
Yep.
but Home of Angry Orchard, of course.
And what is that? Home Vanger Orchard?
Home of Angry Orchard.
Oh, Angry Orchard.
Yeah, which has
right.
a farm up in New York, I think. But there's, here in the Midwest, are the ciders that are being produced. There's certainly some good craft ciders, but there isn't a very big market for the really high-end ciders like you would see on the East Coast, and to a certain extent on the West Coast as well.
Yeah.
So I think the cider world right now is I like to compare it to sort of the craft beer world and say, maybe we're 10 years back from where craft beer was.
Sure.
You see a lot of people, because there are so many cideries. I think there's 120 maybe in Michigan, probably about that number in New York,
really?
About that number out on the West Coast. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a lot of cideries.
That's a multiple of what I would thought.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I mean, the whole cider category right now sells less than kombucha.
Oh,
So,
really?
that's a lot of producers for that. But the interesting thing is that craft cider in particular is becoming more sophisticated.
Yeah.
Partly because we're learning more about how to take the main apple varieties that we grow, dessert apples, whether it's, John of Golds or Honeycrisp or whatever, and turn them into a little better quality ciders than we did originally. And part of it is we're growing better apples, specific apples for cider that have some tannins or have some complexity that dessert
So
fruit doesn't.
the complexity of the cider really does start with the quality of the apple. You can't turn a sweet apple, say, into a sophisticated cider necessarily.
It's hard uphill work. There's a lot that we're learning, especially with Greg, our new cider maker, about how yeast management can help this
I love Greg.
or hurt
Yeah.
you. And I think it's been eye-opening to me because I always was a sort of a naysayer about that. But boy, I mean, proper yeast management seems to play a huge role as well.
Yeah.
But what do the British talk about turning a sow's ear into a silk purse or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Hard that way. Dessert apples they just don't have a lot of inherent polyphenols and things that allow a certain complexity to come out of the cider. Whereas even if you take some of the older heirloom varieties, Golden Russet or some of the other russets, that just have a lot going on in their skin as well as their flesh, but especially their skin, and you turn them into cider, and it really reveals a very different product than say a Honeycrisp cider.
Yeah. Is that a direction that Wilson's is going in terms of having some of the more complicated flavors in their apples, turning into a larger variety of ciders?
Absolutely, yeah. And for a couple reasons. One is that, to be honest, we're really tired of sweeter ciders, which is where the market is at. Yeah. So you're going to make those.
Yeah.
But we kind of, we all prefer to drink drier, higher quality ciders, and with any sort of thing that you do, I think in the world of food production, you tend to start where the market is, but the market evolves over time too. A new product is introduced, and it tends to be broad mass appeal, but then a certain element of that population that's consuming that wants a higher quality product over time, and that's where we're tracking. So we're planting varieties specifically to make a higher quality cider, in anticipation that's where the market's going to be. But also just because, to be honest, we would like to produce a higher end cider.
Yeah. Backing up a little bit on your history, you're from Michigan. Mm-hmm. Your family's from Michigan.
Yep.
And your family is in the apple business since you were born?
Oh, way before I was born. Yep. My great-grandfather was an apple farmer.
In Michigan?
In Michigan. So our family came from Germany originally and settled. My dad tells a story about how smart we were in terms of assessing business opportunities, because they stopped in Chicago first, which at that time was like a nothing town. Whoever it was, great-great-great-grandfather, whoever, said, well, this town's not going to amount to much, and moved to freaking Conklin, Michigan, which is like now 30 people or something.
Yeah. That's some good thinking.
All related.
That's some good thinking. What, really, your family's been in the U.S. for multiple generations?
Yeah. Yep. Many generations. I would say 1830s, 1840s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And pretty much in the apple business.
Got land originally in Michigan and started growing apples?
Started growing well, at that time it was like apples. As recently as my grandfather, they raised apples, hogs, some sheep. Mm-hmm. My dad's generation was the first one that said, screw the animals.
Right.
Let's just do the sheep, or let's just do the apples.
Right.
Rather. Yeah.
Not literally.
Not literally. Yeah. They didn't want to. Yeah. That wasn't allowed then.
And you grew up in that culture. And were they making cider with these apples? Were they selling apples? Was it a farm like you have now, where people pick their own apples? How did that evolve? I mean, what was the evolution of that business for them?
Yeah, I mean, in my family, until my generation, nobody's been in the direct-to-consumer thing. So it's always been the wholesale production. When I grew up, my dad was a big... so my dad and his 4 brothers, they each owned farms, all apples. Mm-hmm. And they each had... Well, I shouldn't say only apples. It was they all had apples, but then one had strawberries, some had peaches, cherries, cucumbers. When I was young, it was widely agreed that you should never plant anything that started with a P. Because, peas was... Everything to do with peas meant you were out there when it was hot.
Pumpkins.
Well, we didn't think about pumpkins.
Okay.
This was like pickles, peaches.
You don't grow pickles. Yeah.
Well,
not the smartest family,
call it.
really.
If
you're
from Michigan, cucumbers are pickles. Okay. I mean, it's just a fact.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, anyways,
I'm starting to understand why you skipped over Chicago.
Yeah.
Just didn't have the...
Yeah, that's right. We just didn't have
the IQ for it, really. Okay. So...
Exactly.
You don't grow peas because it's hot in the summer.
Yeah, it got in the way of fishing and fun, right?
I got you.
It got in the way of, late drinking and...
Right, right. And with apples being more fall...
Yeah, apples were fall.
Yeah.
Apples were cool.
Yeah.
And pea was also Paula Reds, which is a very early variety of apples that we didn't like either.
What's the name?
Paula Reds.
What's the problem with Paula Reds?
They're so early, it's still hot.
Oh, early. I think I meant early like 200 years ago. You mean early in the season?
Early in the season,
I got you. I got you.
Yeah. So anyway, our family was really, we're on a I mean, you know everybody from Michigan because they do this, right? Say, okay, here's the hand, right? That's a Michigander, right?
Yep.
Right?
Upper and lower.
Yep.
How it works.
So if you're there, Chicago's here, right there. Basically, this whole west side of Michigan is fantastic for growing fruit because it has the influence of Lake Michigan. So the west wind blows across Lake Michigan. In the summer, it keeps things cool. In the winter, it keeps things warmer than normal. And you get a lot more snow, so that kind of carpets the ground and protects things. So it grew good fruit. It's actually a very diverse agricultural economy even today, especially compared to Iowa, but far less diverse than it used to be. Even when I was a kid, southern Michigan, there were green bean farms and tomato farms and pickle farms and apples and cherries and peaches and apricots and stuff.
Right. A lot of fruit.
Yeah, a lot of fruit, but also a lot of veggies.
Yeah.
Good rain, watercress and spearmint farms and stuff like that. Just almost anything you can think of. Christmas trees. Yeah. So, but my family was really more and more focused on apples, and starting, especially my dad's generation, like I said, they each owned apple farms with other fruit in there, and then they had, being good German Catholics, they had 44 kids between the 5 of them. So we all worked as a troop in the summer and kind of paraded around these farms. At least the boys did. Some of the girls were allowed and some weren't. But yeah, I mean, we would pick strawberries or shake cherries or pick cherries or thin apples or whatever as a mob. Yeah. My dad was more interested in the marketing side, so he started, I think, 7 different companies, all around appledom. A co-op for storing fruit, a marketing company, a distribution company, a logistics company. All this kind of tied into making things move. And
you spent your time on the land as a kid doing that stuff.
On the land and also in the storage. I mean, in the winter, I spent a lot of time in the apple storage, packing apples, which is kind of a mundane existence. Yeah.
And then what got you out of Michigan?
Well,
yourself.
So the way it worked in our family is when you were somewhere between 6 and 8, you started working. I mean, after schools, you started working, and you got I forget, I think you started off at 10 cents an hour, and then you got like a nickel raise every month or every year, right? But they would put that same amount in a college fund for you, basically.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Nice.
But it wasn't like a question, like, you didn't have an option to opt out or anything until you were 16.
And then?
The day I turned 16, I got the hell out of there.
What do you mean?
I just couldn't wait to get off the farm. I mean, I just could not freaking wait.
To do what? What was your vision
My big thing was I wanted to go work for Motorola. I wanted to be an electronics engineer.
Really?
Yeah.
Where was that? Chicago?
Their big plant was that I was aspiring to was out west. So I went to work for a couple of electronics, like it was just factory work.
In Michigan. When you were 16.
Yeah. But I still worked some on the farm and some.
Did you get some shit for leaving that way from like when you're 16?
No,
they were okay with it.
Nobody thought I was going to stay.
Okay, I got you.
I always liked to travel.
It was common knowledge.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there were like my brother, who was a fantastic farmer, and a bunch of my cousins. They just were. That was them. They fit. I didn't ever fit.
Yeah. And then when did you actually leave? Did you go to college? You must have gone to college somewhere.
Well, so I went. My first thing was to get the hell out of Dodge and study electronic engineering. So I went to Phoenix to DeVry School of Technology. It was a private school for electronics. Yeah. And I did well, but I couldn't stand the school. So then I went to a community college out there for the same thing.
In Arizona?
In Arizona, in Phoenix, yeah.
What? That's a different weather.
Yeah.
Than Michigan.
It was a different world.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, this kid from a very small parochial society moves out to the heart of Phoenix, Arizona.
Did you know anybody?
With a girlfriend. And then we're living in this apartment complex. The managers of it are gay, which I thought, I didn't know that kind of stuff existed.
You didn't know that happened.
I mean, you heard about it,
Yeah.
but it was like out there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, okay.
And I got on famous with everybody. But,
Yeah.
but it was like you walk down the streets of Phoenix, you just never knew. I later lived in India for a while, and that's how I used to say you never knew what was going on. But I realized Phoenix was like that too. You never knew what was going to happen. Somebody could come and steal from you or hug you or
And this was when? What would the year have been when you were down there?
Let's see. So probably 78.
Yeah,
somewhere's in
sure.
that area. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then I moved back into the business. My dad, after a couple of years, I
didn't like it.
I got a job in electronics.
You what?
I got a real job in electronics, and I hated it.
You hated it.
I just hated it. It was indoors all the time. I just thought, this is not for me.
Right.
And
stopped being a hobby.
It stopped being a hobby. It stopped being interesting.
Yeah.
But I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Out in Arizona doing peyote buttons and stuff like that. I mean, it's like,
Let's talk about that a little bit.
Oh, yeah. So one of the people that lived in that apartment, it was a small apartment complex. It was like a courtyard apartment complex. It maybe had, I'm going to say 8.
In Phoenix proper?
Yeah. I mean, downtown, 3rd Street in Mariposa.
Yep.
It was like downtown, downtown.
Yep.
So it had, I want to say 8 or 10 apartments, and every one was very different people, and the one guy was the wealthy guy of the bunch because he was a welder at a power plant, a nuclear power plant that they were building out there. And he was making like stupid money, like, at that time, $25 an hour, $30 an hour or something like that. He always had money. And we would drive out to the desert, which was mind blowing.
Beautiful out there. Yeah.
But I mean, you do peyote out in the desert, reading Carlos Castaneda and all that stuff. You really
get into apples hard that way. You can hold that apple and just really spend the night.
This is a long ways away from Michigan.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting.
That was kind of interesting, but after a while.
But you still found a way your way going back.
I did. My dad came out and he said, "What the hell are you doing?" I was like, "I don't know. This electronics thing isn't working out." He said,
"Well, you were 22.
Something."
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe not that old even. No, I was younger than that.
Yeah.
I want to say I was 19 or 20. And he said, "Well, I bought this apple storage in southern Michigan. This was the first mechanical refrigeration commercial scale on that side of the Mississippi. And it was a huge plant. So apple storage, obviously, big cold rooms, and then a place to pack apples, right?
Yeah.
And so he wanted me to come and run that. So I did, and I moved in with my girlfriend, and then we lived in the office, and it was just, southern Michigan, this was southern Michigan, and southern Michigan has a lot of sort of Arkansas and Missouri in it. A lot of the folks came from that part of the world, and they smoked hard, they drank hard, they smoked a lot of cigarettes, drank a lot of beer, and so we kind of fit into that culture, which was completely different in a lot of ways than Arizona. But that was another couple of years where it was just kind of a nowhere. So then I kind of got tired of that, and I decided I was going to get into solar engineering. That was the thing. I wanted to be a solar engineer, and
that's early, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, this was kind of in the 80s. There was the whole thing.
Yeah.
Was
there was a push
pre Jimmy Carter, or maybe it was. I don't know when.
That would have been post Jimmy Carter, because
would it?
Well, in 1980 wasn't Reagan elected in 80?
Oh, you're right. Yeah. Okay. But anyways, there was Dennis Hayes and there was all this stuff going on about solar and wind. So I was quite interested. I went to a small local college there that specialized it, met some really cool people, and decided to quit smoking cigarettes and quit drinking alcohol, quit smoking everything, and just kind of cleaned up my act, became a vegetarian, and that was kind of a eye opener too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I was talking to Katie the other day, and she said you were a vegetarian until she was born.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We quit being vegetarians because we were growing meat, and Sarah was like desperately, when she was pregnant for Katie, she was really into meat.
Yeah.
So we said, why not?
So you mentioned India. So you spent some time doing that in Michigan.
Yeah, we
Got a degree.
I didn't get a degree.
Didn't get a degree.
No, I had a hard time getting a degree. So then I decided after a while I was going to take a break, and I hopped freight trains and hitchhiked around the U.S. for a while.
See, this is what people don't know. Let me interject here. People come to this orchard, and they see you driving that stupid tractor around, and they think,
tractor.
Yeah, whatever. It's a tractor. And they say, this old farmer guy's driving the tractor around, and he has this apple orchard. And this is one of the reasons I want to talk to you about on air about this, because it's like I hear little snippets of these stories, and really it's because I wanted to find out about that kind of stuff that you did, because your daughter tells me stuff sometimes, and I hear stuff, and it's fairly fascinating. So you were in your 20s, and you left Michigan and started riding freight trains.
Yeah. Well, I was always kind of unsettled. I needed something, and it wasn't where I was at ever.
Yeah.
It's always, I kind of am that way to this day. It's always looking at the next thing. But yeah, so I decided, I'd been reading and listening to Woody Guthrie and really into Dylan at that point. And I don't know, it just seemed like something to do.
And you're in your mid to late 20s at this point.
Yeah. Yeah. Before that, early 20s, I think.
And you rode freight trains around the country.
Rode freight trains around the country.
For a year or two, probably.
No, it was about a year all told. But I stopped certain places. And one of the places I stopped was Crestone, Colorado, which was, there was this guy, William Irwin Thompson, and he was putting on these seminars. He was kind of a philosopher. I mean, he was a really interesting guy who attracted lots of interesting thinkers. And he had taken up residence at this farm that was owned by Maurice Strong. Maurice Strong was like one of the founders of the UN's, what was it? Something on Rome.
Rome?
Club of Rome. Club of Rome. Yeah. So there was the Club of Rome, and it was one of the first sort of looks at the worldwide environment. And it was this powerhouse group of people, the movers and shakers of the world that assembled somewhere, I guess Rome, I don't know, and started talking about how do we save the earth. And he was married to a very pragmatic, practical, I think she was Swedish woman, and they took up residence at this farmhouse, which had another farmhouse. And that other farmhouse is where this William Irwin Thompson took up residence and started offering these workshops. And I heard about one of these workshops, and
workshops in like sustainable agriculture.
It was like imagining a sustainable world or something like that, right? Yeah. And there was people, I mean, this was kind of like, for me, it was as mind-opening as moving to Phoenix, because there were people like talking about Finhorn, in Scotland, I guess, and people that talk to plants, and and I mean, these were serious people, serious discussions about
actual
about
conversations.
Stuff. And then there was this Amory Lovins, this kind of bespectacled guy who was this energy whiz bang, and still is, has the Rocky Mountain Institute up there in Colorado now. But so this little workshop with only about 10 people, I got into it, and I went there, and I mean, I was so outclassed because these people had been reading the Greeks and talking in tongues for years and years and years, and I didn't know a damn thing about it. So I asked a lot of stupid questions, and anyways, long story short, they hired me as a gardener.
Nice.
Okay, yeah. And there was a Hopi Indian there and me doing gardening, and we learned a lot from each other. And in the process, I got to know this guy, William Irwin Thompson, a little bit, and he said, you really should meet Wes Jackson. Okay, I didn't know who the hell that was. But So he introduced me to Wes Jackson. I had the Land Institute in Salina, Kansas. And this was, about a year on into my travels, and I thought, yeah, it's time to do something. And so Wes Jackson and his wife, Dana, had, in Salina, Kansas, set out on this course to reinvent agriculture and sustainable energy. So my interest at this time was still really sustainable energy. And they had wind machines and composting toilets and solar collectors and passive solar design and all this stuff. And they had a little school. So I applied and I got accepted. And Wes Jackson still keeps this letter or something that I wrote to him, an application. And just sounds flaky. Yeah, I mean, he pulls it out to embarrass me, really. But,
right. You still talk to him?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So anyways, we get out. I went out to the Land Institute eventually, and I kind of found a home there for a while. Yeah. Student for a couple semesters, and then I stayed on as a sort of a teacher of sorts, and met my wife out there, Salina, Kansas. We were founding members of SANE, Salinians Against Nuclear Energy, which was a bunch of what Wes would call weenie arms fighting the smallest utility in the United States, building the largest, or the smallest utility that was building a large nuclear power plant in the United States. Okay. And they predictably went bankrupt and all that stuff. But we did our thing. We had a food co-op out there and this anti-nuke group, and then we had the Land Institute, and we rode
bikes. You getting paid?
Well, originally you had to pay.
I was to say.
Yeah.
Where's the income? I don't understand.
Well, it didn't take much.
Yeah.
I mean, it really didn't. We did a lot of dumpster diving. We got most of our groceries from dumpsters.
Yeah.
In fact, it got to be so impressive that we started compiling a list of how good we were eating and what we were eating and stuff like that. But, so it wasn't very expensive. And I don't remember exactly. I guess I'd saved up a little money. I don't remember how I paid for it, but I did.
You weren't getting paychecks from the
Land Institute?
Land Institute.
Oh,
at this point.
The second year I was. Yeah. And then Wes told me, he said, you're not as dumb as you sound sometimes, which was, I guess, tall praise from him. He said, you really should go to college.
That's a revelation to me as well.
You should really go to college and finish a degree. Yeah. And I thought, well, okay, that probably makes sense. So he helped me get into Oberlin College in Ohio, and which I got a degree in political science just because it was an easy degree.
Easy one to get,
yeah. But that, so then from Oberlin launched me into, because they had a program that used to send missionaries across the world, mostly to China.
Yeah.
And then they got a bunch of them got their heads lopped off in the Boxer Rebellion, so they kind of spread out away from China, but they did the same program, but on a more secular basis. Instead of spreading God's word, they spread English, different religion.
Okay. And this was late 70s now.
No, this was like 80.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry.
So I think at 83, or I get confused too, but I think maybe I went to India in 84 with this program. So graduating seniors from Oberlin could apply to this nonprofit organization that was funded by the heiress to the Alcoa aluminum fortune. The guy that discovered how to turn bauxite into aluminum did so partly while he was at Oberlin. And so his sister inherited a bunch of his money and funded this program called the Shansi program. So I went to India after graduating and kind of started. This was the time of E.F. Schumacher and Small is Beautiful and lots of interesting stuff coming out about a different sort of world. I think it's easy to forget just how idealistic times were.
Right.
It was very normal to have very high ideals in the 70s and 80s, early 80s, I would say. And so E.F. Schumacher wrote this book talking about intermediate scale technology. Like, it doesn't all have to be big. It doesn't all have to be super efficient. It needs to make sense to where people are at. And I bought into that. I thought, this is great. It fit a passion of mine, which was always tinkering with stuff I love to, and some kind of social change.
Yeah.
So went to India, found a project in southern India, Karnataka.
Had a pet monkey, I've heard.
I had a pet monkey. Yep, Macintosh was his name.
Who lived on your shoulder?
Yeah,
and
lived
ate apples. No, he ate.
Yeah, well, did a lot of things on my shoulder that were less than agreeable.
I'm sure.
Yeah. But yeah, so I lived in a little village. I learned language. The Kannada is the language. Lived in a village. Tried to teach in ways that I still find puzzling, having spent some time in China later, about how resistant people were. This was a very, very poor village. Mm-hmm. No toilets. There were 2 toilets that this charity had set up. But everybody else just crapped everywhere. And there were just, people lived in hovels, and it was just very, very poor. Their main product was this coarse wool that they grew from sheep. And they made these there were something between a rug and something you would throw over you to protect yourself from rain.
Weather, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they were super cheap, but they took forever because, when you spin, the old way of spinning is you take a bunch of wool and you get it started on a bobbin, and then you spin, right? Mm-hmm. But when you get to the end, then you have to unroll it and roll it back up and then do it again. So you're losing over half your time.
Right.
So way back when, Europeans invented I think it was actually Australians that invented a self-winding bobbin, which means you can just spin. It winds itself, right?
Okay, yep.
And that's all we were doing. That's all we were trying to do, is change this, kind of Gandhian way of spinning,
right,
to a self-winding bobbin.
Mm-hmm. They're resistant.
Very, very resistant. It didn't cost them a penny.
Yeah.
There were people that took it on, of course.
Yeah.
But it was really an uphill battle. The guy that started this work came from that area. I think came from that village, actually. He had gone into the banking sector in the U.S. and became a successful banker, married a Peace Corps volunteer that had been in India, an American, and they lived there. She didn't speak a word of Kannada. And anyway, it was an interesting, very, very interesting time. But so I was supposed to be there for 2 years, but I ended up spending a big chunk of that 2 years in Nepal, because 6 months in, Indira Gandhi was assassinated. And the original idea was that Indira Gandhi hated the CIA, and she thought the CIA was going to kill her. So that was the original assumption, was that the CIA had killed her.
Yeah.
And they kicked all Americans out first thing, and eventually they kicked pretty much all foreigners out that were longtime residents there.
Yep.
So I ended up in Nepal after a brief stint in Sri Lanka, and landed on a really interesting project there, which was...
Was Sarah with you at the time?
No, she came to visit.
She came to visit, yeah.
Yep. We were...
You had kids?
No, we weren't married.
No, you weren't married yet. Okay,
we were just sort of very long distance dating.
Got it, yeah.
Yep. We started dating right before I went to Oberlin, and then ours was a very long distance relationship for many, many years.
So you're in Nepal.
Yep, in Nepal, and this was a really one of the co-sponsoring funding agencies for the Indian project was this World Neighbors, which was a really interesting religious-based but very almost secular kind of nonprofit, really looking at community-based initiatives, appropriate technology, and stuff like that. And they wanted to do a fruit project in the foothills of the Himalayas. And when I went to talk to him, he said, with your background in fruit, yep, why not? Let's do it. Unfortunately, this was oranges.
Okay, right.
Well, I don't
not a lot of oranges in southern
oranges.
Michigan, right? Yeah.
But we did. We started a nursery. There was this kind of an orange. It's very similar to, what the hell's that one you see in the supermarkets now? It's really good, a Caro or something.
Caro?
Yeah, Caro.
Those are nice oranges.
Yeah, that's what these were. They call them Junarkete there. And it was a new orange. And this area of Nepal was just starting to get opened up to trekkers. And tourism is a huge industry. Yeah. And so this was on a main trekking route. And so we were thinking we could plant oranges, teach people to take care of them.
Right.
And it would be a perennial crop, because one of the big problems was mudslides. And how do you keep stuff forested? Because people kept cutting down the forest for firewood, and then you get mudslides and wipe out their rice.
Yeah.
But that was a really isolated, I mean, I thought India was isolated. This was, to walk to a road was 7 hours.
Whoa.
Yeah. I mean, you basically, you lived on what they had there. Like eggs were a luxury.
Right.
Meat was a real luxury.
How do you get on Facebook? You can't even get on Facebook.
Yeah.
Huh?
It was
That's a shame.
But I found it just phenomenally interesting. I love Nepal.
I'm sure. Yeah.
India was so much work. I mean, just living in India was a lot of work. Nepal was like, God, it's just easy.
Yeah.
People were friendly, but also like very, very human. You know, you could really see people's emotions and the culture and stuff like that. So we had two projects. The orange, that was at about 4,000 feet in elevation. Then you went up 8,000 feet, you get into growing apples. So I did two projects, and that was with a different community completely. The oranges were with a Hindu community, and the apples were with the kind of the Sherpa, the Buddhist community. The
Apples,
Tibetans.
because the temperature's lower at 8,000 feet, so apples are happier.
Exactly.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And they had a miserable, I mean, they had been planting apples. They didn't know what the hell they were doing. And that didn't turn out well. The orange project went pretty well, but it eventually, that whole village got wiped out by a big mudslide.
Oh, shit.
But anyway, so yeah, spent a couple years there. And in one of those truly remarkable things that seems to happen often, that's where I really said, wow, I really like growing fruit. What the hell am I doing? This is what I need to do. So
wow.
Yeah. So I went back.
That's a turnaround.
Yeah. Went back home and started working for my brother, who was growing fruit on our family farm for a little while.
Why do you think you changed your opinion? You think it's because the people you were growing
found
fruit with
I really
kind
liked.
of found it? Yeah.
I'd been looking for something that, really fit what I liked doing.
Yeah.
And in Nepal, it was, it was never just growing fruit, for one thing. You had to have an irrigation system. Well, how do you, with no more than what we have here, how do we piece together something that would irrigate this nursery?
Right.
How do we protect it from people and vermin and stuff like that? There was a lot that went into it mechanically and stuff. And I just realized that, by that time I had completely gotten away from the idea of ever being really good at any one thing.
Yeah.
I'm just sort of a jack of all trades. And that just seemed like it was a blinding flash of light one day. It's like, this fits me pretty good. I don't know what the hell I'm doing.
Well, so that's good.
Yeah, it was. So I went home, and Sarah and I got married and moved back to Kansas, back to the Land Institute, and built a big greenhouse for them, and ran a truck farm with another couple. And
What's a truck farm?
Truck farm is that's kind of an old school term, I think. It's like a market garden of a certain scale. So truck farms used to be around big cities like, say, Chicago or St. Louis or something. There'd be a bunch of truck farms, and they'd usually be in the lows, in the really fertile ground that's near rivers.
Yeah.
And they would grow strawberries and vegetable crops and things like that. And they would take them into the wholesale farmers markets. Not the farmer market like we have now, but farmers markets when I was a kid were where the retail shops would come to buy their stuff. That was the wholesale market.
Sure. Yeah,
right? And you would bring your truck full of peaches.
Yeah.
And, you would put them out and you would sell them. And then you'd go home.
Yeah.
Right? And there's still some of them around, but they don't function the same way anymore. Yeah. So we did some of that with another family, newly married as well. And then I was on some Land Institute ground that they had just gotten given to them. And we were, teaching and helping out at the Land Institute, but mostly it was us on our own. And then eventually, so one of the things about being at the Land Institute is you met just the most amazing group of people that would come by. I mean, it was, guys that do, colon cleansings all the way up to, Nobel laureates and stuff like that.
I keep thinking that this person in my mind relates to what you're doing, but who's the geodesic dome guy?
Oh, Buckminster Fuller. Yeah.
Sounds like he could have been involved.
He could have been involved. Yeah. I think he might have died already by that time, but I don't know. But yeah, I mean, it was very much like, I mean, there were students building houses out of hay bales, and, we did all sorts of unusual structures there and different things with windmills and plus, I mean, the thing that the Land Institute's come to be known for now is really perennial polycultures, which was Wes, a geneticist by training, had come to the realization that he wrote a book called New Roots for Agriculture. And basically it said it isn't that we have problems in agriculture. Agriculture is a problem. And it's just from day one, we've approached this thing the wrong way, rather than saying, how in nature do they produce grains and carbohydrates? We're going to do it through sort of chopping and dicing and just taking little tiny bits of information. So to this day, the Land Institute is really pioneering this idea that we should be not growing annual crops, which you got to plant every year, but growing perennial crops. And we shouldn't be growing them in monocultures like just corn.
Right.
We should be growing them in polycultures where there's a self-reinforcing sort of ecology that happens there.
It's a basic sort of
And
idea.
I mean, this was, just complete crackpot stuff,
really?
Right? I mean, the Kansas State University, Iowa State University, it didn't matter. They just thought, this is garbage,
Really?
It's just, And now Iowa State sends students there, Kansas State sends, I mean, they all do this stuff. Partly because that's where the funding is, but partly because it's just very obvious that there are a lot of major problems that we've created with our series of agriculture. And also, plant breeding has come a long ways to where, I mean, if you ask a perennial plant to do what an annual plant does, it's kind of a problem, because annual plants have every reason in the world to make a lot of grain, because that's their only hope of survival.
Right.
Of passing on their genetics, whereas perennials, they got roots in the ground. They don't really need to worry about it. So coaxing a perennial into high grain potential is a problem.
Yeah.
But they have a plant now. They've gone back, because wheat, corn, they all were perennials at one point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So they've gone back to wheat and rice even, and found perennial roots to it, and they have a product now called Kernza, which is a perennial wheat, which is actually quite impressive. And General Mills is working with them. They do a lot with Patagonia, the company.
Yeah.
And so anyways, Wes would attract all these weird and wonderful people. You got the chance to listen to Wendell Berry or,
nice.
It was a rich world in this little town of 40,000 in the middle of Kansas. I mean, literally right in the middle of the United States.
Yeah.
One of the people that he attracted was a guy from a very, very wealthy guy who inherited a publishing fortune and wanted to set up not a land institute, but a sustainable farm. And he had some land out in Rifle, Colorado. So this other couple and Sarah was teaching at the time, and this couple was working for the Land Institute, and I was working for the Land Institute and truck farm, all this stuff. And he was going to hire us all to go out there and put this farm together.
Yeah.
Right? So we all quit our day jobs. Sarah quit teaching and all this stuff, packed up there, and we got there, and he said, I changed my mind.
Oh,
So
that's convenient.
yeah. So anyways, at that time, what did we do? We went to Arkansas, worked at a place for a couple of years called Meadow Creek, which was sustainable. It was a really bizarre place, like 1,300 acres, just beautiful, rugged, valley bottom farm, surrounded by people that had been taking care of themselves, since Jesus was a baby. Yeah. I mean, it was these were people that were self-reliant. There were people there, a couple of brothers I remember. You hear all these stories about people, and then you meet them. But there was a couple of brothers had never been to a grocery store in their life. They grew everything themselves. Yeah. They either hunted it, fished it, or grew it. That was it. I met a woman who was a grandmother at 24.
Wow.
And there was just some really thick culture in that area. And then plopped down in the middle of it is this little bit of hippiedom, which was two brothers, one with very good grant raising abilities, supported, I think, by Rockefeller Fund. I don't remember who all supported them, but they got grants. They built this great big, first they built a sawmill, started cutting down trees, and then they started building buildings. And they they got associated with Northwestern universities. They must have an architecture program there or something. Yeah. So they came down into the middle of the Ozarks and designed these passive solar buildings, houses, about 7 of them, and this great big conference center. They got a grant from Department of Energy for huge solar array, and but the problem is they built these houses as if they were up here. In the cold. Yeah, it's hot down there. Yeah. So what you ended up with is saunas. Yeah. So they were all made with locally cut sawn materials, which cracked and didn't fit together well, and it was all sort of better in theory than in practice. Right. And then they wanted to grow crops, and they had a hard time. The soil was garbage, but we did grow some blueberries. We ended up, I hired on as farm manager, and we ended up moving more into livestock. That's when Sarah discovered she really wouldn't mind eating meat. Right. And but the main thing from that was just we became very, very close with some of the local folks, and
this is in southern Missouri?
Northern Missouri, right up in the Ozarks, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I guess I'd never really paid attention to how rich the culture can be, because growing up German Catholic, you don't really think of it as a culture, really. It's just what you knew. Yep. But down there, I mean, there's no way around it. Right. It's a culture.
It's its own people.
Yeah. People knew so much. They knew, and I thought in a way, it was hubris that you almost can't even think about, that we were offering classes to these people about how to be self-reliant or how to be sustainable. Yeah. Stuff. I mean, it just funny, unbelievable.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds funny when you say it, really.
We really need some more cider.
I was going to say, let's do a little more pour here. So this is you're probably getting close to China.
Yeah.
Because that's the time I hear about the most. Yeah. I guess maybe because that's where.
So let's see what happened. Where the hell were we?
You were in northern Missouri.
We're in. Oh yeah.
Teaching people things they didn't need to learn.
Arkansas. This is Arkansas. Yeah. Yep. And that place ended up sort of running out of money. And so here again, my father said, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Right.
So he had, this was the early 90s.
Yeah. And you're like 30.
Yeah, something like that. And he said, in the early 90s, in the 80s was the farm crisis in the breadbasket. Yeah. Wheat, corn, beans, all took a dump. And in the 90s, that happened with apples. Okay. And the same thing, land prices going up, interest rates going up, farmers overextended. At the same time, the price of the stuff was flatlining or even going down, and the demands of retailers were going up while your labor costs are going up, your spray bill is going up. Everything is working against the farmer. So in the 90s, we lost about 30% of the apple farmers in the United States.
Really?
Yep. And my dad took over what at the time was probably the biggest, if not certainly one of the biggest apple orchards in the United States.
He seems like he was pretty ambitious as he moved forward.
He was a very ambitious guy. Yeah. He was never graduated from 8th grade.
Really?
And
wow.
Wow. Good guy.
Yeah. Good guy.
Just a natural businessman. I mean, his instincts were quite impeccable.
You. Yeah.
He said, well, so he and a group of investors had bought, this was the largest fruit tree nursery, coupled with one of, if not the largest, apple farms or fruit farms in the United States.
Wow.
And they had bought it out of bankruptcy.
In Michigan.
Yep. Southern Michigan. Yep. And just down the road from where we bought the tulip bulbs, by the way.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But in any case, so he said, I want you to come back and run. I said, well, I don't know anything about this anymore. I don't. Yeah. But now, come on. I said, this was Dad. He was always like, you'll figure it out. You'll figure it out. You know? Yeah. So Sarah and I, and our, let me think. Yep. Because Katie was born in Arkansas. So, we moved, the kids and us, we moved to a old farmhouse and ran this orchard. I say I ran it. It ran me. I mean, it really did. This was at the Land Institute. We had a motto that said, what the hell was it? It was primitive living at an industrial pace. And that was kind of that could have been the tagline for this farm too. It was definitely an industrial pace.
Yeah.
And we never made any money. No. I mean, Dad bought this place, I should say, for like 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah.
It was the best varieties, planted all in high density. This guy, Wally Heiser, that did this, he was a premium.
Yeah.
He just died, but he was absolutely one of the finest horticulturists Michigan's ever produced. Yeah. And he started the International Dwarf Fruit Tree Association. He was a magnet for people with good ideas from around the world, and he encouraged them very selflessly. He didn't always maybe make the best business decisions, but he was a brilliant horticulturist and a great person. So Wally Heiser had started this whole thing, and we had farms with apple trees planted 6 inches apart, which nobody was doing at that time. I mean, it was just, an M27, which is, these trees were about this tall.
Yeah.
And he was planting three rows of apple trees right next to each other, triple rows and double rows and, all sorts of stuff, just trying everything. But in any case, we bought it cheap. We couldn't make any money. And my dad always told me, if you wake up in the morning and you don't want to go to work, go back to bed till you figure out what you want to do, and then go do it, So I told him, I said, I don't want to do this anymore. A couple years of this, it was, because you're 350 people working for you. You're on the freaking CB radio all day. You got a CB radio in your house, and it's shit falling apart, and irrigation well isn't working. It was just a disaster. But so I told Dad, I said, I'm going to do something else. I want to stay in the apple business, but I don't want to do this. He said, well, figure out what you want to do. So how'd that go? I wanted to do hard cider because hard cider, there was trying to remember the brand on the East Coast that it'll come to me eventually, 6-0 and all that shit.
Yeah.
Hit you don't remember it. Anyway, so there was a brand of hard cider that was taken off, and I just kept hearing, because I was in the apple business, but I didn't want to be doing the apple business. And so I started looking at hard cider. Buddy and myself, we went to a guy that had worked for me at Hilltop. He was from New Zealand. We went to England, and we toured around England and looked at the hard cider. I said, God, this is great. This freaking rich culture. And it's a new product. And there's just got to be a way to make this happen. And then I got home, and this guy I had roomed next to, we had a house that we rented, 4 of us, and this guy was from China, and his name was Sunya, Andy, we called him. And he and I got to...
Easier to call him Andy.
Yeah. Well, he insisted on me.
Oh, he did? Okay.
He spoke better English than I did. I mean, he was a natural at U.S. living. I mean, it came easy to him. So anyways, he and I became close friends. And after I got back from England, he called me up one day, and I'm still working at what was called Hilltop. And right in the middle of apple season, he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm harvesting apples." "Well, my cousin Ming has a group of investors from China, and they want to make an apple juice factory." I said, "I don't know nothing about making apple juice." He said, "You got to go meet this guy." I said, "Andy, it's the middle of October, right?" And by this time, I already told Dad that I'm going to find something. I'm out of here.
You're gone at the end of the season. Yeah.
So I talked to Dad, and he said, "Get the hell out of here. Go do it." Oh. So I fly out to New York City, and I know nothing about it. So I go into this room, right? And here's, the president of Bear Stearns and the CEO of Chase Manhattan Bank. And, it's
really?
Like all these people. And I have business cards that say orchard manager, right? They're like, "Yeah, what do you really do?"
Yeah,
right?
Right, yeah.
Because I didn't know anything about any of this stuff. Yeah. This was all set up. So they used to do these road shows when China was first opening up. They would bring these people in. This was from the city of Tianjin, which was at that time the 3rd largest city in China, right? And they would bring people in from Beijing or from Guangzhou or whatever, and there would be whole delegations. And the Chinese would bring all of the, of course, party officials and the city managers and all that stuff, and they would float these various projects. Here's our wish list. We have this many things that we'd like to invest in. And one of those, in Tianjin's case, being surrounded by apples, was we want to be able to process apples.
What does that have to do with the Bear Stearns guy? I understand why they're there.
So these road shows are intended to find investors, right? So Bear Stearns and these guys are the people with money, and so that's where they're targeting. They're targeting, and Tianjin was also trying to set up its own stock exchange, so that was another thing.
I see.
So anyways, long story short, about an hour into this meeting, I mean, I'm like off by myself, and I meet this guy from Tianjin who was wearing a Yankees hat. And I'm like, "Yankees." And he's, yeah. And anyway, through a translator, we kind of became sort of friends.
Yeah.
And when he got back to China, he wrote me, I'd asked him some questions, and he wrote me this long letter, said, "You really should come to China and just check it out, just see."
Yeah.
So this guy, Andy, and myself, we flew over to China. We land in China on New Year's, on the lunar calendar night, right? And anybody that's ever been to an Asian country, but especially China, early days China, during New Year's Eve, I mean, it's like you've landed in a military zone. It's unfrickin' believable. For one thing, everything's closed. There's nothing. You can't buy nothing, right? You can check into your hotel, but even the hotel's food thing is closed down. And fireworks just everywhere, right? And I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah, what the hell is this? Yeah.
So anyway, we got on a train and traveled. There were 3 main apple areas, and we traveled them by train. And I swear to God, there was times when for 3 or 4 days you didn't lose sight of an apple tree. It was just at that time, because I told Andy, China doesn't grow that many apples. Well, by the time we took this trip, I had done a little reading, and it turns out China was growing apples.
Why? For what reason?
Why did they grow them?
You don't see apples in their food too much. Why do they?
Well, actually, they are. The Chinese are very, very different than us. They don't use apples in their. They don't eat a lot of sweets, but they're the largest. As a culture, the Chinese eat more fresh fruit than anybody else in the world. But it's all done separately. It's something that you do when you have friends over. You have nuts and fruit, or at the end of a meal, you have fruit, or. Fruit was always auspicious. It was always a luxury, especially in the hard times of the 20th century. It was a big luxury. And so what happened after agriculture kind of liberalized and they allowed farmers to decide what they grew. Well, China had two things that argued for fruit. One is they had a lot of scrubland. Okay, they can't grow good corn and stuff like that. They can't make any money on it. But fruit trees just don't need that great of soil. And the second thing is they had a cultural and market bias towards fruit. You know, they had a big appetite for fruit. And so given the choice, people planted fruit. And I mean, it went from, you know, China being a non-player in the apple world and in the fruit world in general to today. I mean, China grows something in the order of half of all the apples in the world.
Really?
They grow 7 apple trees for every one in the United States, which is the second largest producer.
Wow.
In the top 10 fruit, I think China is number 1 in maybe 6 or 7 of them.
And was it this way when you got there, or that became?
It was already happening, but mostly it was trees in the ground. Because so when we first traveled over, there was 92, and you know, Tiananmen had happened just a couple years ahead of that. There had been this in the early part of the 90s. There's a great book about how the farmers changed China, and it basically argues that under Deng Xiaoping, some group of farmers in Anhui province just started ignoring the dictates and saying, we're not going to sell our fruit. We're not going to sell our stuff through the centralized system. We're just going to do it our way. And they sort of let them go for a while, and they saw it was good. So eventually that became the modernization, the economic modernization that is today's China. At the same time, it made multimillionaires out of the first really rich people in China were farmers. Really? Yeah, because they really cleaned up.
Right.
So there was... And Chinese, you know, have a great thing called the red eye disease. You know, you see somebody else doing something, your eyes grow red from envy, you know. And so they're going to do two things. They're going to try and pull you down, but they're also going to try and copy what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so that happened a lot, and people started planting fruit just gangbusters. So by the time we got there, this was 10 years into that probably, there was a lot of fruit on the market, but there was a lot of trees that were just, you know, a meter tall and going to come. And so we went over there with the idea, well, we would do what we do in the States, which is essentially fresh fruit. But a big farm over there, a big orchard, was 1/3 of an acre. So I said, well, so to get enough apples to fill a decent-sized apple storage, you'd be working with 30,000 farmers.
Yeah.
Right? And this just didn't make any sense at all, right?
Right.
So then we started thinking about juice. And that's essentially what happened. So I went home after a trip, and Dad said, what'd you think? I said, well, I still like hard cider. And he said, you're not very smart. He said, you have the biggest population in the world. They eat the most fruit of anybody in the world. Yeah. And there's nobody doing it.
Right.
I mean, what's the problem here, you know?
Did they want apple juice? I mean, would they drink apple juice? Or they want?
I mean, this is the one thing I've learned about the food business. Well, I think about anything is if you wait for consumers to tell you what they want, you're too late.
I'll tell you that's true. Yeah.
So, no, there was nobody screaming for it.
Right.
But I guess we had this big. There was already starting to be a glut of apples, and they were garbage. I mean, these apples looked terrible, right? And so the farmers that did a good job could sell for a decent price, but most of the farmers didn't know what they were doing. Yeah. There's no extension service this day over there. There's nothing. It's
just no idea.
Yeah, no idea exactly. So, and the varieties, their principal variety over there was called Guoguang, which is actually an old American variety called Rawls Janet.
Okay.
And it's a nice apple. It's not a great apple, but it doesn't size well. It just produces every year. That's its main claim to fame. It made good juice, though.
Yeah.
So, basically, I took a couple more trips over there, figured it out, and came back, bought a bunch of equipment, loaded Sarah and the kids and all the equipment on a U-Haul and hauled it to the West Coast, stuck it on a couple of containers, signed a joint venture agreement with this big Yoi Guandochang canning company in Tianjin. And then I flew over. Sarah and the kids, this is early 93. Sarah and the kids were going to, early, yeah, exactly, January 93. Sarah and the kids were going to come over later. And I got there, and it was like we had agreed in this joint venture contract. This is a company that did, a similar U.S. company would probably have like 40, 50 employees. These guys had 3,200 employees, right? Most of them did absolutely nothing. Right. And so we signed this agreement saying they were going to clear out this space in this sprawling factory complex they had. And they were going to have it done by this time, and they were going to do this, and they were going to do that. And I got there, nothing had been done. Not a thing.
Did you guys make deals with a bunch of apple growers?
No. I just figured we'd find the apples.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that was, yeah, that would have been smart. But again, we've already agreed on that point, right? Yeah. So I spent a month of my life sitting in a guy's office who was the general manager of this factory. And here's his routine. Come in the morning, work starts at 8, he'd show up around 9:30, right? I was there at 8 o'clock every morning. I was just chomping at the bit. And people bringing you tea and all this, being very courteous to you. And I, of course, didn't know a word of Chinese at this point. And I guess one of the things that I learned early on in India and Nepal is that forget all the lessons and all that kind of crap. Just, if you have an ear for languages, you just do it. Just dive in.
Yeah,
that's a great thing. So I started learning from taxi drivers. But anyways, in the meantime, I'm sitting in this guy's office. He'd show up at 9:30. He'd drink some tea and read the paper, right? That took him till about 10:30, 11 o'clock. Then he'd have to start getting ready for lunch, right? And he'd get ready for lunch. They had a shower in there. They'd go take a shower and stuff like that. And then he'd get in his Mercedes and go off and have some big lunch. And lunch for them is like 9 courses of food and 12 courses of baijiu, hard liquor. So he'd come back completely schlossed.
Yeah.
He has a bed in his office.
Right.
So he'd sleep till 2:30, right?
Yeah.
And then he'd get maybe a few people trickling in and drinking tea and talking about something.
Business or something.
Might be business. And then around 3:30, 4 o'clock, he'd get ready to go home, right?
Yeah.
That was the day. And you just day after day. And I'd be like, every chance I can, like, when are we going to get that place cleaned out? And, what's the electricity like? And, do we have to upgrade? And it was all like, nah. Yeah. Only thing he ever wanted to talk about was what car we're going to use.
There you go.
He wanted to know, because at that time, Chinese cars were complete garbage.
Yeah.
And so you had to have a good car, and it should be a showy car, And so he wanted to know, like this Benz or that Benz. Those were the two questions, right?
That was the conversation.
Yeah. So after about a month of this, I said, this is not going to work. So I had this guy, the guy with the Yankee hat and stuff, and he had set me up with this guide. So I called him and got a meeting with him and his translator. And I said, this ain't going to work. And they had just passed a law a couple years ago. Motorola had just started. They were one of the first companies that went in as a wholly foreign-owned enterprise.
Okay.
And that previous to that, you had to have a Chinese partner.
Yeah.
So they loosened it up. After Tiananmen, investment fell off. They loosened it up. So I said, I want to be a wholly foreign-owned enterprise. So he said, okay, we'll do that. And which initiated a whole spiral of events that I, to this day, find just incredible. But
you were going to be the owner of this yourself?
Yes. Yeah. Well, my dad was the investor.
Okay, gotcha.
I was doing the work.
Yeah.
Right. And we had so we started off. We found a spot. What I used to call him my father-in-law or grandfather. Godfather. He was my Chinese godfather. That's what Dad called him. Yeah. And so anyway, my Chinese godfather finds this guy to show us around different sites, and we find this one that's an old truck repair place, right?
Yeah.
But it's got the tall ceilings I need. It's a concrete building. It's got a place that I thought we could live in and office space. So we settle on that. And then this young American guy, well, he's Chinese, but his father was the head of the, it's kind of like the combination of NASA and the FAA. In China, all the flight stuff used to be, one agency,
Right.
and he was famous. His father was really famous. Later became kind of disgraced, but this was one of the young princelings. I didn't know it at the time,
Yeah.
but eventually I came to find out. And he spoke perfect English, and after a month of getting sort of roundabout answers to every single question, except what are we going to eat or what are we going to drive.
What are you going to drive?
So he starts giving me some real answers. And so I said, okay. And he found this place. I said, okay, perfect. Let's just do this. So we set up a wholly foreign-owned company, and we gave this guy some shares in it, and he was going to be our sales director, right? So about a year later, that relationship had crumbled because it turns out he couldn't sell anything. But it also turns out that the whole thing was a bit of a ploy. He was sort of waiting for us to start production. He had set up a parallel company to do exactly what in fact, he was further along than we were. I was trying to bring American technology in, which was like for we were going to be a juice company. We had to have a way to preserve it. I didn't want to use preservatives, so I wanted to hot fill it. And then you need certain caps and certain bottle finishes, smooth finishes. And so I was going around to glass companies trying to figure out who could do this and stuff. Well, he had already found it. I mean, he had all this stuff sorted out. He had a separate company established, and he just didn't know how to make the juice. So he was waiting for us to make juice. He had a whole team set up to do it. And
but he wasn't sharing this information with you.
No. He was just on the sly, ready to. I mean, this was a sort of classic maneuver in China where you just sort of. Usually, it was done with a joint venture, where the joint venture Chinese side would just harvest all the information from you and then sort of push you out the door. Right? He was doing it.
Doing that. Yeah.
So, anyways, we ended up getting a divorce, as it were, over that thing, and then we set up a company. So we were the first commercial juice company in China. We did really well. We set up and started cranking out juice in '94.
He was also doing it though.
Initially he was, but it didn't last long. Because by the time we actually started production, he was pretty much out the door. I mean, he was. Yeah, it was already, our relationship had crumbled, and it was obvious there was a lot going on, and we started to get, a lot of people didn't like him. And so, he would do things like, if you were traveling with him, he would walk up to the counter of the airlines and say, "Do you know who I am? Put me on this plane." Right? He was a real pleasant fellow that. People really liked to not like him.
Yeah.
So it was... Eventually, when the information we started getting was just from people that didn't really want him to succeed.
So your company was established.
Yep, Great Lakes it was called.
Great Lakes.
Yep, very original name.
What's that in
Dahu
Mandarin?
Dahu. Da means big, which is in Chinese everything big is good. Supposedly, and then Hu is like water, and it means lake really. So it was a good name. It was a really good name, and we proceeded to bring. We weren't groundbreaking in that all we were doing is bringing stuff that was already proven in other parts of the world to China.
Yeah.
Whether it's hot filling, which they didn't really practice at all, or the technology that goes with the packaging side of that. Juice making, which, I mean, the juice that they were making at the time was what's called Hawthorne Juice. So Hawthorne is actually an edible fruit, but it makes a juice that looks like ketchup. It really looks and tastes a lot like ketchup. It's just only slightly less viscous.
And that's a fruit? A hawthorn?
Hawthorne, yep.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, and they sell hawthorns in China. They'll put them on a skewer and dip them in sugar, hot, what do you call it? Like
caramel, or
not caramel, but it's like melted sugar that's still clear.
Okay, yeah.
Candied.
Yeah.
So anyway, there was a lot of this hawthorn because it was supposed to help men's virility. So it became a really hot item about 2 years before we got there.
Yeah.
When we got to Tianjin's a city of think of Chicago, right? Nobody ever hears of it, but Tianjin is like the port city for Beijing, and that's where we were located. And when we got there was 120 companies making this one product in Tianjin, right?
Wow.
And none of them making money. And the canning factory that we went to do a joint venture with, the thing that took me over the top with them is that they had told us how much juice they had produced in the last couple of years, and it was truly spectacular, the volumes.
Yeah.
And then one day I asked a guy at the factory when I was still involved in this joint venture, like, what's in that building? And they're like, nothing really. Da, 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 da. I like, can I see it? Well, it took a little doing, but I got to see it.
Yeah.
It's full of juice.
Just full of...
They had never sold it.
Full of inventory.
So that's all it was. And it was old and, falling apart, broken down cases.
Because no one was buying it, or because they couldn't
market it? No one
was
buying it. They just couldn't sell it.
Yeah. Well, that must have been a little discouraging.
It was. That's when I decided there's no future for this, because the whole reason that we were told you have to have a joint venture partner is because they can sell the stuff. I knew we could produce it. I was worried to death, could we sell it? You asked about apples. I was sure we could find a way to deal with that, farmers and buy apples.
Yeah.
I mean, farmers are farmers. They want to sell their stuff.
Yeah, they want to sell it.
So
what happened then? I mean, what?
So then we got a divorce from them, went and started our own business, right? And then it's all up to us. And then we started with 12 of us. I imported an old Toyota Camry, had like 200,000 miles on it or something. But I knew it'd be a good, reliable car, and it avoided all the duty problems. Yeah. And so we would, during the day, we'd scrub bottles, press apple juice. I brought a couple of presses over from the States, and we'd fill these bottles. We'd stick them in the back of the truck, and we'd pedal them around and stuff
like that. People bought that stuff?
Yeah.
They did?
They did, because it was American, and it was clear. It was a very unusual product.
Yeah.
It looked like this,
Yeah.
It was clear, and it was... And they tasted like, yeah, this is good. Yeah, this will sell.
So the stuff that was in the big building...
That was before. That was, I'm kind of jumping around, but...
was not clear and was not...
Oh, no. It looked like ketchup.
Yeah, it did. It really
literally,
did.
Well, it didn't look as good as ketchup. It looked like ketchup that had water put in it, right? It was just kind of this dull pink gook.
But it was apple.
No, it was Hawthorne.
That was Hawthorne. There's no apple involved.
No.
I got you.
No, they were desperate for an apple juice.
Okay, I got you.
At the production level, everybody saw the interesting thing about apple juice, but nobody knew how to make it, because you have to clarify it, right? And that's technology. And then you have to pack it in a bottle. Nobody knew how to do that.
Yeah.
So
you start selling this apple juice.
Yeah, we just started selling it as apple juice. And from 94 to 97, we just... it was just like, wow, we started selling Tianjin, and then Beijing, and then Shanghai, and then we started
opening...
your
company?
Yep. We opened an office in Beijing, then we opened an office in Shanghai, then we opened an office in Guangzhou, and, pretty soon we had 100 people working for us,
wow.
and everything's going great. And the beauty of it is that you could charge a pretty good price. Apples were cheap, and you could charge a good price. The margins were good. We're making money. We made money from 1994 on. We made money, and so in about 2000 or so, I was telling some guy who, there was a lot of people that had been around China a while, and I was bragging to him that we made money from the first year. He's like, yeah, from 1994 to 1997. Everybody made money. Right. Well, 1997 rolled around. Chinese learned how to do this stuff. Yeah. They learned how to do marketing. They went to work for Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble and Johnson & Johnson, and they learned how to do this stuff. And they could do it so much quicker, so much cheaper. Yeah. And they had almost unlimited access to money. Yeah. And that was kind of, at the end of the day, our story. In 97... we had expanded, and we were looking at a new factory, and and we had this big expansion going on. We signed with an international distributor that distributed within China, so blah, blah, blah. And the whole thing just went to shit, just because at almost exactly that time, this big new competitor arose, a local Chinese, who sold for half of what we sold, and just set the world on fire.
Yeah, right. So what did you do then? How did you end up selling the company?
No. Well, so around 1999, we we just started. It wasn't that sales necessarily slowed. Sales did slow some, but not much.
Yeah.
Sales were still growing. It's just it went from being hugely profitable to being marginal to being very unprofitable because we couldn't sell anything if we couldn't match prices or come close to it, right?
Yeah.
One of the big advantages we had early on was that our movement as a juice company, or our development as a juice company, very much tracked the development of hypermarkets as they developed in China, whether it's Carrefour from France or Walmart or Metro from Germany. Mm-hmm. All of the big chains had moved into China, and they were all desperate for showy, well-packaged, high-quality products, and nothing did it better than ours. We had this beautiful half-gallon juice hot fill that just looked so beautiful. And our big product, by the way, at this time was no longer apple juice. It was our number 2 product, but orange juice was what really sold. Yeah. And Chinese just loved it.
Yeah.
So we kind of moved along on that and got really good display spaces, like end aisles and big display spaces, and it really made a difference. Well, when this Chinese competitor came in, they couldn't replicate because they were in Tetra Pak, so it didn't look as good. They couldn't replicate what we did in terms of showing, but they started outbidding us for all these spaces. Without those spaces, we couldn't really sell much. Yeah. So it was a vicious cycle. Yeah. And within 3 years, by about 2000, we're basically bust. Yeah. In most countries of the world, China had no bankruptcy law. We'd have been. I woke up one day, we owed $11 million. I had not a penny in the bank.
How'd you deal with that?
So we had a guy, Mike Blackburn, who is just a wonderful man from England. He was the guy who set up Mars, the chocolate company, their operations in Asia, and then later moved to China specifically to set up their China business. And he was just a really pragmatic but very smart business guy. For instance, Mars had never made a bar chocolate, but he early on fought the Mars brothers to say, this is what we got to do in China. To this day, the Dove brand, Dove is now a brand of chocolate here as well. Yeah. That all came from China.
Yeah. Oh, really?
Right. Yeah. They had never been in the bar. It was M&Ms and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So when they got into the bar chocolate thing, they developed this really fantastic marketing push, as smooth as silk, where it was just seen as so elegant and so, it fit the scene of the time where Chinese consumers were so wanting to show off. And they could do that by sitting in a Starbucks, but there weren't that many Starbucks yet. But boy, they could sure show it off. They had chocolate. This bright, shiny packaging, and it just worked beautiful. Yeah. Having said that, they lost hundreds of millions of dollars before they started making money. But now they still have, I think, 50 or 60 share of the chocolate market in China. It's just unbelievable. Wow. Yeah. But anyways, this guy, Mike Blackburn, was retiring out of Mars and wanted something to do, and he wanted to live in China. And so he became an investor. And when the world went to shit in our company, then he stepped in, and we just engineered. We went from 350 people down to 100. We cut every cost we could. We went to the banks and said, Mike engineered this. We had a what was the name of the bank? We had bank loans from several banks, but not ING, BMP, the French bank. Okay. We had a loan from them, I forget, several $1 million. And they had this guy, he was short stature, and he liked to thump tables, right? He was like, we got to have our money, you can't pay. So Mike said, why don't we just give him the keys? I'm like, no, we're not going to give him the keys. I said, just give him the keys. So this guy started thumping the table. I said, here, there you go. Yeah. Got your own apple juice factory now. This guy just turned white. Literally, he just turned white. Yeah. I wish I'd have had a camera.
That's funny.
Because no. So we got him to sign an agreement, but we got him to agree to to take a deep haircut on the loan we had, only if everybody else would do it. So then we went to the next bank and got them to agree.
Yeah.
And then we went to all of our suppliers and got them to agree. And at the end of the day, we shrunk it from like $11 million down to $1.6 million or something like that. And we had supplies and stuff. And we just recalibrated the business. And we started to make juice drinks and stuff that was cheaper and da-da-da-da. But the truth is, the fun was gone.
Right.
And it was all about counting beans and, making really ruddy decisions about people and materials and stuff like that. Yeah. So we climbed out of the hole, went back into profitability, and we were still the number 2 juice in China at that time. We're not anymore, but we ended up selling it to Del Monte, and then they sold it to somebody else. But we, it wasn't like a big windfall.
Right.
I didn't.
And that's why you got out eventually, really?
I never rivaled Mark Zuckerberg or anybody, but
that's surprising. And that's why you came back to the States?
Well,
just because you ended up getting bored with it a little bit. You sound like you really wanted to build it, and then when it was built, you kind of like, okay, I built it.
Yeah. So we had been looking to move back because the kids were now getting close to college age, and they had a wonderful education there because Motorola had set up a school. Sarah taught there, and it was, at one point there were like 30 some nationalities in this school. Wow. It was just unbelievable. So that part of the education, the living experience stuff was really great. But we wanted to move back here for them to have college. And to be honest, I mean, the pollution and being around that many people just after a while creeped out. So we started looking for places in the U.S. going back to about 2000. We'd spend a couple of weeks in the summer, camp out. We wanted to be in the university town in the Midwest. Yeah. And
this is before you got out of the company? You're still in the company?
Oh, yeah. No, we're still in the company. I mean, when we went in 93, we said it's for 2 years. And then every year it'd be 2 more years. 2 more years. And after a while, people said, 2 more years, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, I mean, we sold the company in 2004, I believe. Really? Yep. But I had to stay for 2 years
to get the whole thing acclimated.
Yep. To set it up. So I worked for Del Monte for a couple of years, which was another real experience. I mean, it kind of reminded me a lot of my experience when I thought I wanted to be in electronics. And then go to work for an electronics company is like,
it's not the same thing.
This is bullshit, right? This is just garbage. Everything has got paperwork upon paperwork and reports and all this stuff. You can't get anything done.
Yeah, right.
So anyway, we signed an agreement, and then it fell through, and then we signed it again, and it went, and then I had to stay there for a couple of years, and then we ended up deciding to move to Iowa City, and because we just liked it. We would spend a couple weeks each year, in a different Midwestern university town. Boulder, Madison, Lawrence, whatever. And we liked Boulder, but the price of real estate was, because I wanted to do this kind of a small you-pick farm thing. Yeah. And Boulder got too expensive. The farm we were looking at went from $1.6 million to $4.9 million in the 3 years we were looking at it. Wow. And I was like, this is, forget it. It was a stunning place, but it wasn't that stunning. We hit Iowa City, and literally Sarah and myself looked at each other after day 2 and said, this is it. Yeah. It's just the right size, the right community, the right feel. Nice. And then we found Wilson's Orchard, and it was like, and they wanted to sell, and they're like, God, this is all made in heaven. Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's it. So
and that was 2005, 2006.
That was, we moved here 2006 prior to the school year 2006, because Katie and Jacob, we were building a house. We bought a different farm because we couldn't buy Wilson, bought a different farm, and we're building a house. And when we moved back, the house was not quite done. We moved into town, and they went to school in town. And then, that was it. And then in 2008, the Wilsons, after many go-rounds, decided they did want to sell it. And,
And they got a hold of you, or you got a hold of them?
Well, I had made them an offer. They had tried to sell it to me earlier, and I said, I have a farm now. I'm planting apples. They knew that. I was real upfront with them. Yeah. And I said, I don't really need it. I'd lease it for 3 years while my trees are coming into production. Chuck's like, no, we're going to sell it.
Yeah.
Well, then eventually he came around and said, okay.
Yeah. I think the story is a real great one for anybody to hear, because I think that you've, we give each other shit a lot, I realize, but the progression of your life in terms of starting in Michigan and ending up here could be a very short ride to Iowa, but it seems like such a long circle, and it's just I think it's a fascinating sort of take on like a curious mind, and it's obvious that you have that. Can you talk a little bit about what is happening now at Wilson's and what you want to happen at Wilson's going forward, and what kind of, because I know being part of this for 4 years has been great. I know there's been a lot of talk this year in terms of kind of, the evolution of the business and what we're trying to do here.
Yeah. So, when we moved back to the States, I had a little different idea about how things might turn out. So, having grown up in this big sort of industrial apple complex, I was quite interested to slow things down, shrink the scale down, and do something direct to consumer. It just always seemed to me like a compelling lifestyle and even business model. And I have to admit, coming from a very active, very fast-moving business culture overseas, back to here, I was looking to slow down a bit, maybe even sort of a semi-retirement thing. So when we ended up back here, put our feet on the ground, planted an orchard, eventually bought Wilson's Orchard, things kind of started to take on their own sort of dynamic. And we first started to find out that there were just a lot of things that we could do, minor improvements that made a big difference in terms of the overall business, expanding the production of the bakery, adding sweet cider, and then hard cider came along. And all of that sort of took us step by step in sort of a type of mission creep almost, as we moved to, we sort of doubled sales and then tripled sales, and it just sort of took on a life of its own in a lot of ways. But what really has changed things dynamically has been really getting more people involved. And in particular, sort of at first, my daughter, Katie, came into the business, and she was an art major, so we thought, well, she'll be living in our basement the rest of our lives. But that didn't turn out to be the case. Turned out she wasn't too bad at doing marketing stuff, and we got her involved in the business. And then after a short while, she started to say, "Hey, we're getting all these inquiries about events, and why don't we have an indoor event space? It just seems like such an obvious and good business." And so we walked that road for a while, thinking about that, and we went out to California, looked at wineries, looked at sort of not just architectural styles, but also business styles. And we came back and took down a few more barns, repurposed the wood, built what we feel like is a pretty good structure. And we started to hold events. At the same time, we were in the hard cider business by now, so we said, well, we may as well have an upstairs and have like a tasting room. Now, if we're going to have a tasting room, we're going to have food. If we're going to have food, it better be good food. And so one thing led to another, and we ended up with a pretty full-on restaurant up there, and got lucky enough. Well, there's good and bad luck, but we did hire Matt, and when you came into the business, it really changed things because it ramped up not just our the food offerings. Obviously, we hadn't done a lot of food, but it sort of in some other ways, it sort of put pressure on the rest of us to sort of up our game in terms of quality, because it was a high quality offering. And so Katie, took that on, and that became her business, and it pushed forward, and it really for a couple of years was pretty consuming. At the same time, we're building the other business. And then more recently, our son Jacob came back into the business, and he added another kind of dynamic because his interest was very much, let's build this thing more robustly. Let's look at it as a year-round business. And we started a whole discussion about a couple years back, largely by Skype. He was still over in China, and we were back here. But we did a lot of sort of back and forthing between my wife and I and Katie and him. And we started to formulate this larger idea. And basically, that's the road we're on right now. And we for the last year, we've really been working to grow the business in three significant ways. One is we want to obviously make a more sustainable, more cash-friendly business enterprise. I mean, this was a business that 9 months a year was closed down, essentially, until we added hard cider and the cidery. But still, the biggest part of our business, the farm market and the U-Pick and all that stuff, was closed 9 months of the year, only open 3 months of the year. And, that's just so you got to build up a bunch of money, and then you sort of slowly piss it all away through the year. And then by the time you're getting ready to open, you're sort of looking at every dime and thinking, Jesus, it's getting a little thin. So we wanted to change that. And that led us into looking at year-round business, more like what the cidery is with events and restaurant. And the hard cider business has become more like that. So we have been tracking down that lane for this last year and expanding what we do so that we can bring people out for more of the year. The second thing that we're really interested in doing is building a really great business culture, and I would just say culture overall. I mean, I kind of cringe at the thing of business culture because I feel like what we're really trying to do is create a great culture, which is a place which includes what we do when we're at work, but also the kind of people that we are when we're not at work and how we get along and the kind of community, the larger community that supports us of customers and things. So we want to do our part to make a really interesting place for people, especially younger folks, to come learn, explore, grow the business, grow themselves. And that's a really big part of our sort of plans for going forward is trying to put the nuts and bolts to that very difficult but very important part of the puzzle. The third thing is that really we all, the four of us, realize we want to do something more than just run a business. There are glaring things that need to happen in society. There's glaring things, particularly in agriculture, that we feel like, I wouldn't say we're uniquely positioned, but we are certainly well positioned to start to address some of these. We want to, even in this very grueling climate in the upper Midwest, we want to be able to grow fruit crops without a huge bunch of inputs of pesticides and fertilizers and that stuff. And that's a challenge. I can tell you, I've got good friends that are organic growers, fruit growers in this area, and they'll tell you it is super hard. It's not just hard to do, it's very hard to make a living doing it. So, but that's only part of the puzzle as well. We want to be a company and a business that builds and grows crops from the ground up, literally builds soil and helps nourish the earth. At the same time, we also want to be looking and talking and addressing the larger social, political issues that are kind of holding us in this vicious cycle of agricultural, I'm going to call it, I know we have a very productive agriculture. When you look at it on a yield basis, we grow so many apples per acre or so many bushels of corn per acre. But really, if you look at it on the grander scale and back up, get 10,000 feet away and say, what are we actually doing? Well, look at all the collateral damage, whether it's water or air or people or communities, that's come from our unending quest for higher yields, unending quest for maximizing every single thing that we can take out of the earth and pump into the marketplace. And that's something that we feel very strongly about, has to be part of our business. So I think, going forward, those three things, the making a sustainable business that's more year-round, building a great community of people, and being part of the solution to a really enduring, sustainable agriculture. I think that's where we're focused. That's where we're targeting. And there's plenty of stuff there, plenty of work there for the rest of my life for sure, and probably several generations after. So, yep, that's where we're headed. Hopefully.
Yeah. Well, it's been, like I said earlier, it's been kind of fascinating to be here for the past 4 years because you and your family, you work so hard to do something that I always try to do when I had my businesses, which is hire good people and let them do their thing. And I see that every day in the people that are on this property doing their thing. And it's been really fun. And I know a lot of people have always asked me, what's the deal with Paul and what, where they're from and what's the history of the orchard. And so it's really fun to get that kind of story for, I think, me and for anybody listening. So thanks for coming out today. And
yeah, well, I didn't have a choice. You had the good cider. So. I
did. Anyway, that's it for today at the Pollinate podcast. If you are so inclined, subscribe on the YouTube page. We'd love to have you see all these. And we'll be back with some more next time. Thanks.